Most people think of limitations as kind of a pain in the ass, but we here at the Bureau of Curiosity have a saying, and that is that limitations can be your friend. Most artists you will find, myself included, complaining about limitations. Sometimes that's, the budget. We don't have enough money, or the deadline. I didn't have enough time, or I really, need this piece of gear to do this thing. And, we've all done the complaining, but my contention is that limitations are actually viewed properly can be a real boost to creative thinking. If you read artist interviews, and I read a lot of them, you will almost always find in there some variation on, well, what we really wanted was X, but what we only had was Y, and as a result we came up with Z that was way better than we could have imagined if we had had everything we wanted in condition X. So, necessity being the mother of invention, you'll find people coming up with all kinds of creative solutions basically because they have to. So, from my own experience, the way this played out, at least in one example, was that, when I was a young person, I had a 4-track recorder, and that allowed you to kind of record 10 different tracks of audio, and then that was it. The piece was done, whether you liked it or not. In that sense, I would have loved to have a Fairlight CMI or access to, a 64-channel studio. I didn't, but there were positives because of that. One, I got really good at arranging because you had to think ahead of the time, like, I've only got, track here and I want these 3 parts, but can I, get 3 parts onto 2 tracks as long as they're not playing together, and where am I going to put the guitar solo? So that was useful. And the other thing was that, because, after the 10-track limit was hit and that song was done, I was writing songs at a pretty rapid clip. It didn't take me that long to finish up a song. And what happened was I had a recorded output where I could actually, hear myself learning and getting better most of the time from track to track. So in contrast to people who are working today, where you could have, in some cases, unlimited tracks or unlimited plugins, I know there are people, myself included now, who struggle with the idea of finishing a track because you literally could tweak it until you die. I don't recommend that. So in today's kind of arbitrary experiment in limitations, I decided, could I make a credible piece of music using only the music apps that I have in my iPad? I have a few, and usually what happens is that I get them and I think they're kind of cool and I play with them for a while and then never really think about them anymore. So I thought it would be a good challenge to say, why don't you, take these things that you only sort of know how to use and see what you can do and try to make a piece. And so let's go over there and see how I did.
So what we're looking at is the first app up, and that's called Aphelian. And basically it's like a sequencer app that's got 4 separate loops. Each one of them is kind of a shape-based situation here where you can choose how complex or simple things are getting based on the shapes, the tone map in the background. You can select which notes are being triggered. So if I fire this one off, for example, you can see how the sounds are kind of moving around this shape. And you can probably imagine, I'm turning that one down, that as you start getting 2 things going, you could have something quite complex rather quickly. That's if you want to see how the 2 sort of sequences are interacting. There's a mixer, which includes drums. Which I am going to use. And basically, I think I'm not going to be able to learn this in any depth. What I'm going to do is just sort of get some loops going, get the drums going, and kind of monkey around with it as I'm recording, then go back and see if I've got some really good bits, cut and paste those, and that will be the basis of the track. Okay, this next app is called Photophore. You can see these particles moving around. That's because the app seems to be based on what is called a flocking algorithm. Birds, insects, and other animals have sort of almost like a mathematical way of following the leader as they move around. And this synth, I believe, is emulating that type of behavior when you're triggering notes. You can see the flock starting to move. That's something I'm probably going to return to later, the idea of the flocking algorithm. But for the moment, I'm going to be using this one for sort of a pad type thing. And I also found in here like a nice bass sound. So let's get that in there. This one's kind of like a looper of some kind, and it's called Cycle. And I'll just show you kind of what it does. You're gonna you play stuff, and then you get a loop going around. And you can, I guess, get in there and program, it's got different sounds, and also you can program how long it takes for the loop to die off as it cycles around. But I could see this is useful for some soundscapey stuff in the background. Okay, here's a fun one. It's called Finger Fiddle, and I've bought the cello, but you can get other stringed instruments. And what this is you've got the fingerboard of the cello here, and then you bow with this finger. Or you can pluck like a pizzicato, and it'll do double stops. And because it's a fretless instrument, you can slide between those pitches. Nice, but the thing I like best about it is that you can kind of really emulate bowing techniques, Nice. So I'm pretty sure I can find a spot to play a bunch of this, cut and paste it, see what we get. Okay, feeling some drum fills. This is Sample Tank. It does a whole bunch of stuff, but for this, I'm just using the pads, playing some fills. Okay, here's a fun one. This is Geoshred from Jordan Rudess of Dream Theater. It's kind of set up to play like a guitar, but you can get it to do other things like flutes and saxophones and all kinds of stuff. The engine for doing guitar is kind of interesting and sort of well modeled in a way. You kind of pick up a lot of the kind of weird string interactions of a guitar. Okay, when it was time to do the vocals, I decided to do some lead and backing vocals through an app called Flux FX, which was in part designed by Adrian Ballou, the guitar player, and it was a great multi-effects program that had an XY pad on the iPad that allowed you to kind of morph around the effects. I say was because in the time since I shot the footage for this video, and now when I'm explaining it, an update to my iPad has rendered it unworkable, so I'm not sure that you'd be able to use it unless you've got access to a very old iPad. But still, it was a great program, and I hope they bring it back. The other lesson, I guess, here is in terms of vocal placeholders. This is a very common technique that singers do when you have a track but the lyrics aren't done yet. A lot of times what you'll do is just sort of vocalize over the track and, get a feel for what might be a good melody or, a lyrical flow. And sometimes you will have something that actually works as a finished lyric, and then you have to make the vocal utterances kind of, it's a little bit like a jigsaw puzzle. You have to kind of make those things you sung map to a meaningful lyric. Every once in a while, a la Phil Collins and Susu Studio, you say something that really doesn't have a good word that you could use to replace it. And in that case, Phil just decided that it was going to be the name of a girl, and problem solved. But again, within a lesson on limitations. So there were multiple takes. That's why you'll see fades between. But pretty much what I was singing, was all off the top of my head, and a lot of it came out in mostly one pass. Anyway, that's the story on the vocals.
Except in my dreams, Helen left Troy, death city. If I'm enough, it's not what it seems. The moonlight. Electrical angel, the Darian Marguerite. Lights crash onto the break. The scream didn't matter. Our American dreams and battle breaking the clouds, so critical angel to love Marguerite. Now lights crash onto the break. The screen didn't matter. Our American dreams. Lights crash onto the break. The screen didn't matter. Our American dreams.
Okay, so at the end of this experiment, I always like to ask myself a few questions to see kind of how I did. And the first one is, do I consider the experiment a success? Basically, yes. I mean, I set out to make a piece using only the apps I had on my iPad, and I did that. Sticklers might say, well, but you used a DAW and did some editing in there. You could make that case that maybe I should have, only, made a piece coming out of the iPad and just captured it with no editing at all. maybe that's another, assignment for another video. I would come up with a very different piece because I would think I would have to. I know you can use multiple apps going, outputting audio in an iPad, but it would be a very different piece. So the next question is, did I learn anything? And the answer is yes. I mean, for one, it kind of forced me to utilize these apps that I would think are cool and always meant to get around to, but just time and life gets in the way. So here I am, not really with a deep understanding of these things. I could gain that later, but as a way of sort of, emphasizing play and just kind of knocking around real fast, it was a good way of using these things that I have, but, never get around to using. I would also single out two of the apps as being particularly useful. One, the finger fiddle or fiddle finger, whichever, I can never remember. Because it allows you to do kind of an emulation of bowing a string all the way and up to, doing trem and all that kind of stuff. I could see using that and downloading other strings, because you can get like violas and violins and stuff, and using that in a track. I wouldn't use it necessarily solo to try and convince somebody that I've got a solo cello going there. But in the context of a piece where there's other elements and you wouldn't maybe notice it, or with effects, I think that could be brilliant. And likewise, I'd single out the Geoshred as being particularly interesting. Like I said, I don't have an MPE keyboard yet, but that allows you to get some of that between the kind of cracks playing going. And I've since learned that, you can buy, it comes with a bunch of guitars and some sitars and stuff like that, but you can buy other sounds, including a lot of ethnic wind instruments. Specifically, I'm interested in something like an Armenian duduk, which is like a flute made of apricot wood that's really beautiful. And I could see really being evocative when you play it, because you're not, again, constrained to playing it on a regular keyboard. You can kind of warble and move around and pitch, which is a beautiful sound on the duduk and other flutes. So the other apps were also super useful, but I just wanted to highlight those two. And then I would say, what about the piece itself? It's a credible piece of music. It's not as polished as the stuff that I usually do. So if I were going to return to it, what I probably would do would be to, polish the lyrics into something more meaningful and coherent, and maybe keep the melody, because I think, some of the melody and the harmonic stuff is cool, but the drums were kind of like just a thing that comes out of that one app, and I would probably extract kind of what is essentially the song, but switch up the orchestration. So it's a little bit counterproductive, I guess, because part of the deal was using the sounds on the app. But if it was just as good to get the experiment going, make the thing, and then decide what you want to do with it, well, then that's fine too. And last but not least, it's like, I'm very self-conscious as a singer, and normally don't even like people to hear me sing my songs when they're done and polished. So to actually allow myself to be filmed making this stuff up on the spot was super uncomfortable, but I consider that like an opportunity for growth. The internet being the internet, you're going to drag me, that's okay. I'm a big guy, I can handle it. So I think all things considered, a successful experiment. As always, let me know what you think, and like and subscribe if that sort of thing moves you, and we'll see you in the next one. All right, thanks for listening.